Let's see.
I could comb away my troubles, but all I have is
Thanks to the 5 gift subs, Gorgasmic, and resub E-Man. Thank you, Gorgasmic. There's a lot of other things that happen too. Well, no one hung themselves on this set of Wizard of Oz. It's a myth.
and clog the drains of showers. If I only had some hair.
Thanks to the Prime, Jackie Boy, and gift sub Moff. That's super sweet, Ski Master. Sounds good. Thanks to the Prime.
The National Weather Service
Cap.
has issued a downward spiral warning in your area. Please remain calm. Do not attempt to flee or seek shelter. Resistance is futile.
Wow. Thanks to the 5 gift subs, Biles. Appreciate it. Biles.
Oh, boy.
Thank you.
I have a feeling we're not in Florida anymore.
I am Dr. Spiral, the great and powerful. Welcome to Green Screen City.
God damn, going in hot.
Hey, I've seen you before. You look just like that man behind the curtain.
Watch Tea Time? What the fuck
Pay
is
no
Tea Time?
attention to the man behind the curtain. You were brought here because you wished for your hair back.
Thanks to Prime Wilson and gift
I
sub
can tell where
Glorified.
this is going. Are you really doing this?
This is an ad?
Were the 4
Oh
other
shit.
times not enough?
You're doomed to lose all the rest of your hair. Years later,
Alright,
most of you
alright, I
watching
see.
know exactly who these characters are. Far less known, however, are the people behind these characters. Principal photography for the
I watched
Wizard
most of the
lasted
ad.
from
I did my
October
part.
1938 to March 1939. During these 5 months, the stars of the movie were subject to some of the most horrendous conditions in the history of the American film industry.
There's the resub Mord
When it was all
and the
said
Prime,
and done,
Kako, and
not a
gift sub
single
Jack.
character who set off down the yellow brick road left the land of Oz unscathed.
Private drought even harder than England. Rural America is in a desperate plight.
That's not to say that things were much better back home in Kansas. The 1930s were a period of major turmoil and hardship for the American public. The Great Depression ravaged almost every sector of the economy.
Yeah,
While
that'll
most
do it.
American industries were struggling, the film industry was booming. To escape from the dread of everyday life, most Americans sought refuge in the cinema. Nowadays, about
How do they
1 in
pay
10
for the cinema
Americans have gone to
experience,
the
though?
movies in the past week. In the 30s,
I imagine it couldn't have been
was
super
not
cheap.
uncommon for half of all Americans to pay a weekly visit to the theater. Hollywood was in the midst of its golden
Thanks to the
age,
resub
a
Precipice and
period
Tier
where
1 Cody.
studios had unparalleled influence over the industry. During this time, the top 8 studios controlled 95% of American cinema.
Maybe Camino.
And no studio was more illustrious than MGM.
Rest in peace, MGM.
They were the studio widely considered to provide audiences with the biggest stars and the grandest spectacle. MGM smoked the rest of Hollywood with its unmatched financial and critical success.
I've already seen Operation Soda
Across
Steel.
the 30s, MGM films accounted for nearly a third of the nominees for Best Picture, and nearly 3/4 of the total.
What happened to
profits
MGM? They
generated
suck.
by all 8 major
Well, actually, they
studios.
just got bought, didn't they?
MGM's dominance over Hollywood was due.
All
in
they have
large
is
part to
James
the
Bond
strong
now,
leadership
and
of
Tom
its
and
chief
Jerry.
executive, Louis B. Mayer, who in 1937 was the highest paid man in America. 1937 also saw the release of one of the most groundbreaking films ever made, and
There's
one
a
of the
Tier
most
1 Blaze
successful
and resub
films of the
Villain
time
Views
to
and
not
PJ.
come out of the MGM system. That year, Walt Disney would release
Woo!
his first animated feature film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The film was an immersive fantasy unlike anything audiences had ever seen, and by the following year had become the highest-grossing film to date. Snow White's record-breaking success inspired
There's a
MGM
Mr.
to
Fisher.
produce a spectacular fantasy of their own. In 1938, the studio bought out the rights to L. Frank Baum's popular children's novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and the rest.
I had
was
no idea
history.
it was based on a book.
History that some members of the cast and crew wish they could forget. Unlike Snow White, The Wizard of Oz was entirely live action, which presented a series of challenges. while
Jesus
attempting
Christ,
to
Justin.
transform fantasy
Thanks
into
for some
reality.
Baconator.
One of the most iconic scenes in all of cinema
Holy
is Dorothy
shit, thank
waking
you.
up in the land of Oz and the
God
film
damn, man.
transitioning from sepia to color.
Must be a big Wizard of Oz
The
fan, hey?
visual coloring method used to develop the film was Technicolor, which required heavy exposure due to the process of splitting the image into
Thank you,
different
Justin.
colored channels. As a result, the Oz set required an exorbitant amount of lighting, so much so that the temperature on stage often surpassed 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's a
The
literal
heat was
normal
suffocating,
afternoon in
and
Florida.
Stagehands frequently had to be carried off stage after fainting. The set lighting was so intense that some actors even claimed to suffer permanent vision damage. The exhaustion suffered from the oppressive heat was
What?
only magnified by the arduous production schedule. For 6 days a week, the actors walked into the studio at 4 a.m. and didn't leave until 7 p.m. A significant part of each actor's day was dedicated to the meticulous preparation and removal of their costumes. The Scarecrow.
I don't understand how.
Tin Man
Well,
line
I
are
guess
one
I
of
could
the
see
most
it
recognizable
with the vision
trios in
loss.
fiction. All 3 characters were brought to life by the skilled design of makeup artist Jack Dawn.
Thanks to
While the
Resub, Tree Nut,
costumes
Rex,
presented an
Trooper, Kit
impeccable
Kat, and the Prime
external
Manx.
appearance, conditions
William.
weren't so pleasant on the inside. Every morning as the Scarecrow, Ray Bolger would have to spend an hour getting his latex and plastic mask painstakingly glued to his face, and every evening he would spend an hour getting it removed. The mask completely covered his facial pores.
To be fair, that's
Being
not
unable
that
to
bad.
sweat while wearing it. One could
A
only
lot of
imagine how it
actors
must
spend
have
like
felt
7
to wear
hours
that
in
thing
their
for
shit,
15
or
hours a
putting it
day.
on.
But Ray Bolger didn't have to imagine. For 22 weeks, it was his
It
reality.
could be worse.
By the time filming was complete, the repeated applications of the mask left Bolger with permanent grooves around his mouth and chin.
Holy
but
shit.
considering what happened to some of the other actors, he may have gotten off easy. The Tin Man was played by Buddy Ebsen for about 9 days. That's how long he lasted during filming until he was hospitalized from a severe reaction to the Tin Man's metallic makeup. Ebsen's silver
Did they just
face
actually
was
spray
made out of
paint him?
aluminum powder that would eventually coat the inside of his lungs.
Oh my
further
God.
asphyxiating him. As Ebsen
What?
sat bedridden under an oxygen tent in the hospital, the studio could not have given him less sympathy. Producer Mervyn LeRoy
Yeah, get stronger
refused to leave the
lungs,
hospital,
nerd.
angrily insisting that Ebsen return to the set. After 2 weeks out of action, the studio replaced Ebsen with Jack Haley. Much like Pete Best getting cut from the Beatles, Buddy Ebsen would end up becoming one of the unluckiest men in show business. Not only was he unceremoniously
Exit 3 gives up
fired
Swift
from
Light.
what would have been the biggest role of his career, the incident left him with chronic bronchitis. Jack Haley managed to avoid a catastrophic reaction to the aluminum makeup, but it still gave him a severe eye infection that forced him out of work for days. The rest
Why
of the
not just
suit was
switch
so
the
stiff
like
that
from
it rendered
aluminum
Haley
powder to
unable
like
sit down or lie down during
crayons
filming.
or something? I
In
don't know.
order to
Fucking
rest
melt
in
crayons
between
on his
takes,
face.
He was forced to lean on a reclining board. But despite all the complications it caused, the Tin Man costume may have still been preferable to that of the Cowardly Lion.
Thanks to
Burt
Resub,
Lahr's
Hypno,
lion suit was compared to
Death,
carrying around a mattress.
the Prime,
The bulk of
Glarfield.
the costume consisted of a 60-pound lion hide, a real lion hide. Combined with additional padding, some estimates put the weight of the full costume at 100 pounds. Burt Lahr would be
God, he's like a real-life Rock
for just
Lee.
a few minutes, and he would frequently have
What?
to take off the suit between shots to avoid exhaustion. The prosthetic mask covering his face didn't allow him to fully open his mouth, forcing him to consume all of his on-set meals through a straw. Halfway through production, Lahr gave in and sacrificed an additional hour each day in the makeup chair so that he could eat solid food at lunch. As someone who was known by his peers to be a hypochondriac, Burt Lahr was in near constant agony. But by far the worst costume-related accident during the whole shoot happened to Margaret Hamilton, better known as the Wicked Witch.
How?
Nowadays, there are
That
lots
seems
of
so
ways to make
simple.
someone look green, but in
Did
1938,
they put-
the only
oh.
tried-and-true method used by Hollywood makeup artists was copper paint. Copper, of course, is
Wow.
toxic when ingested by humans. This was known back then, but the studio showed no restraint in applying the copper concoction directly to Hamilton's face and hands. Towards the end of production, Hamilton realized that the constant application of the witch's makeup had tinted her skin green, an effect that lingered for months after the job. Wearing the makeup
Holy
on set
shit.
was a constant struggle. Once it was on, Hamilton was unable to touch anything without staining it, and required assistance to perform the most basic of tasks.
Thanks to
But the
Resub,
day-to-day
Kaji,
struggles of
and
the makeup
Benji,
would
and
pale in
Wicked, and
comparison
Holmes,
to the
and
accident
Soup.
she suffered on December 23, 1938. When departing Munchkinland, Hamilton was scripted to exit the scene in a fiery cloud of smoke. The first attempt at the stunt went flawlessly, but director Victor Fleming wanted to get a few extra takes for insurance. On the fourth attempt, the pyrotechnics were ignited too early,
Oh,
causing
they
Hamilton to be
incinerated
engulfed in
her.
flames. The accident resulted in second-degree burns on the whole right side of her face. The skin on her right hand was entirely scalded off. But before Hamilton could even receive medical attention,
Whoa.
she had to slowly and excruciatingly have the copper makeup removed from her freshly burned skin with rubbing alcohol. Margaret Hamilton would spend the next 6 weeks in the hospital before returning to the set.
Holy
On
shit.
her very first day back, she was scheduled for the skywriting scene, another stunt
Oh, goddamn,
involving
Justin.
pyrotechnics.
Thanks for some Lysol.
Hamilton adamantly refused to put herself anywhere near fire again and threatened to walk out of the production
Thank
right
you
then
so
and
much,
there.
Justin.
Since the project was nearing completion at that point, the studio acquiesced, and the scene was completed using Hamilton's stunt double, Betty Danko. While filming that very scene, the smoke pipe underneath the broomstick exploded, and Danko was violently flung from the installation. The explosion was caused by the special effects crew coating the pipe with asbestos, another toxic substance.
No,
that
that's the science isn't there yet. We don't
Asbestos
know
was
if that's
also
actually
used in
dangerous.
Ray Bolger's scarecrow suit, as well as the snow in the poppy field scene.
Unusual weather.
Oh my god, they use
Betty
asbestos
Danko
there?
was hospitalized for 11 days with field scene.
All of this is asbestos? How cheap was it? I feel like it'd be cheaper just to, like, I don't know, like, sprinkle fucking sugar or something. How fucking cheap was asbestos back then? I'm gonna look that up myself. This was 1937, right? So let's just look up 1930 asbestos price. Like, they had to be just be giving this shit away for free or something. Thanks to the resub sub and the Prime Frosty, Tooth Fairy, and the 2 gift subs Red Dragon. 5 cents for 100 pounds. Yeah, that actually seems about right. There's not really like an estimate here, but it just, all these sources keep confirming that it's like the cheapest thing at that entire area. That's fucking crazy.
Unusual weather we're having, ain't it?
Betty Danko was hospitalized for 11 days with internal damage from the explosion, as well as a 2-inch deep gash on her leg, a wound that would never fully heal. It was a hefty toll for a gig in which she earned just over $800.
Oh, that's big money
Long-term
though.
Health effects on Margaret Hamilton were far less known. What is known is that she would go on to develop Alzheimer's later in her life, a condition that has been linked to copper poisoning.
Thanks to resub Burial, Ligmo, Revenge, and Tier 1
total,
Lil
6
Lizard.
performers on The Wizard of Oz faced some kind of serious physical trauma. Not even Toto left the set intact. However, after enough time had passed, many of the actors could look back on the whole ordeal as a bunch of amusing war stories. Most physical ailments are only temporary. Mental ailments, on the other hand, tend to stick with you for life. And out of everyone in the Land of Oz, perhaps none suffered a worse fate than the star of the show, Judy Garland. She was without a doubt one of the most talented performers of the 20th century. Her portrayal of Dorothy in The
Thanks,
Wizard of
Mr.
Oz
Monster
has
and
served as an
Airbird.
enduring symbol of youth and innocence. And even though she was never imprisoned by a brutal costume like the other actors, the studio paid no less scrutiny to her appearance. Since the character of Dorothy was envisioned as a prepubescent girl, the then 17-year-old Garland had to constantly wear a tight corset to hide her more mature figure. But that was merely one aspect of the studio's efforts to keep Judy thin. Garland was placed on a shoestring diet, one that would not provide her with enough energy to complete the arduous filming days. To compensate, the studio kept Garland on a steady intake of amphetamines to keep her working long into the day.
Oh.
The amphetamines subsequently necessitated the use of barbiturates to prevent Garland from exhausting herself.
Wow.
Years later, she claimed that during some periods she would only sleep 4 hours every 3 days. The fact that she was able to perform as well
That's
as she
efficiency.
did under these conditions is nothing short of astonishing. By the end of production, Garland was addicted to both drugs, an addiction that would last for the rest of her life. It certainly didn't help that her time as a child star directly contributed to deep-rooted psychological problems. Despite her brilliance as a performer, Garland
Is it
was
Tier
always
1
encumbered by
MMO
major
Live
esteem
and Tier 1
issues.
Max?
The insecurities
The Prime
began when
Chrism.
a 14-year-old Garland overheard the MGM executives referring to her as a fat little pig. This moment completely devastated her self-image and
Jesus
manifested
Christ.
itself as an unobtainable standard of perfection that she spent her whole life chasing. And even though she would wind up becoming one of the greatest performers ever, in her mind it was never good enough. In many ways, Judy Garland was the first tragic child star, an archetype that has sadly become much more common in modern times. Clinical psychiatrist John Linden encountered many such patients.
Yeah,
while
if you hate
practicing
your
in the
kid,
Los
you
Angeles
get them in a
area.
movie.
He observed that premature stardom
I can't think of
resulted in
any
many
child
actors
star that
forming
has
severe
become
identity
normal or had a
issues.
good
They
life.
tended to report a feeling of profound emptiness when they weren't performing, as if they were marionettes whose true selves lacked any sort of meaning. The reason so many young stars end up on the downward
Disney
spiral
actors?
is that many fail to develop any sense of individual identity.
Disney
Some attempt
actors?
to fill this void
Like
with
who?
sex, drugs, and alcohol, but it's often no match for the constant anxiety of never really understanding who you are. There exists a tragic
Hillary
irony
Duff.
between
Yeah,
Judy
true.
Garland and Dorothy, a character who wanted nothing more than to find joy and comfort
Thanks,
in a
Risa,
wayward
Mysterious Maid,
world.
Zombified, and
Unlike
Olivia.
Dorothy, however, Judy Garland never made it over the rainbow. On June 22, 1969, Judy Garland was found dead of an overdose on her bathroom floor. She was just 47 years old.
Goddamn.
In the years leading up to her death, her increasingly erratic downfall was treated by the media as some sort of morbid spectacle. The American public seemed unable to reconcile how she could have possibly been anyone other than the innocent farm girl from Kansas. Hollywood has the remarkable ability to make the wildest
Here's
parts
some
of our
merch house.
imagination come to life. But the magic of crafting immersive fantasies comes with a very real dark side. Oftentimes it's easy for studios to lose sight of the real-life human beings at their disposal, and to end up treating them as, well, marionettes. It would be easy
I mean,
to
yeah,
look
that's
back
Hollywood.
at all the trauma from The Wizard of Oz and chalk it up to a product of its time. Back then, studios could just get away with all of it because if any actor fought back, they would be blacklisted from the industry. But still, even after the studio's iron grip over the industry was broken and actors gained more leverage over their careers, it would be naive to suggest that much has changed in Hollywood. The inner workings of the film industry
Harvey
have always been an
Weinstein.
enigma. The
Is he
history
in jail
of
yet?
Hollywood is smeared with talented people guilty of terrible things. Very rarely do we ever get to discover what truly goes on behind the big
He
green
is?
curtain. Out of every
That's good.
scandal that does come to light, we can only imagine what remains.
Well,
in the
Bill
dark.
Cosby's an
In
innocent
the
man.
business of telling
He's
the biggest
back on the
stories
streets,
possible,
baby.
the smaller stories
He's
often
an
get
innocent
left
guy.
behind.
He shouldn't be in
For
here.
22 weeks in 1938 and 1939, 6 of Hollywood's most talented actors were practically tortured, with many of them experiencing long-lasting and permanent damage to their bodies and minds. The result was one of the single greatest artistic works of the 20th century. The Wizard of Oz
I never
was
liked
the
that movie.
defining career achievement for every single person
even
who
as a
worked
kid.
on it. Their suffering had directly contributed to the most beloved film of a generation. It's tempting to dismiss everything you've heard today as an exploitative cash grab from greedy media tyrants, but for MGM, it was never that simple. In 1939, MGM released 41 films in total, premiering a new
Whoa.
movie once every 9 days on average.
What the
At
fuck?
this time, the studio had no shortage of revenue. What they
That's
coveted
crazy.
instead was prestige. Every year, MGM would earmark one production as their prestige film, a project that was never intended to turn a profit.
Thanks
but
for some
one that
wavy,
existed for the simple
spectacular, and
purpose of
fine.
flexing the
Canny,
cinematic
Dark
might of the
Angel,
studio.
and Ludwig Reinhardt.
From its very conception, The Wizard of Oz was designed as a monument to the single most dominant empire in the history of the film industry. 35 years after the film's release, toy executive Marty Abrams was conducting market research on local children and found that 80% recognized the characters of Oz. Today, memorabilia attached to these characters now sell for millions at auction. Over the years, the performers who brought these characters to life have gradually faded from public memory, their sacrifices ultimately forgotten. Dorothy, Scarecrow, Tin Man, Cowardly Lion, and the Wicked Witch have managed to outlive them. Such is the ultimate
Thanks to
destiny of
resub
people in show
Noob and
business.
Noir.
Actors are tragically temporary. Eventually, only the characters remain. Today, it may seem unfathomable that our most popular and celebrated actors will inevitably meet the same fate. But at the end of the day, it is art, not the artist, which stands the test of time. Despite the turmoil suffered by the actors on the set of Oz,
That's pretty
one has
powerful.
to wonder
Not
if
wrong.
any of them ever regretted it.
Yeah, I think pretty much all of them, I would think, right? I mean, I guess the one that got it the
4,500
easiest was
years
the
ago.
lion. What was his name again? Case in point, I have no idea who the fuck he is, but yeah, the lion seems to have got it easiest. His was more of just like an endurance test. The others were actually poisoned. Frank Bon. Oh no. Is it Frank Bon? Brett Lar. He was the lion. I just typed in Brett Lar regret, and I didn't get any results. Thus, he didn't regret it. Man was happy. Since nothing came up, it means he must have loved it. See, what did I tell you?
Ago, the ancient Egyptians completed the Great Pyramid of Giza, a structure so remarkably ambitious that it would stand as the tallest building on Earth.
He's a tier 1 lonely gamer.
For millennia, archaeologists found it inconceivable that it could have been constructed by any other means than a massive workforce of slave labor. The pyramid defied our expectations to such an extent that some people believe it had to have resulted from supernatural or extraterrestrial influence. However, recent archaeological studies have uncovered a truth that is somehow even more unbelievable. The vast majority of people who built the Great Pyramid were volunteers. The ancient Egyptians risked life and limb to participate in something greater than themselves. Their reward for 20 years of deadly backbreaking labor is that we still talk about them today, long after everything they knew and loved ceased to exist. What would you be willing to sacrifice if it meant you could live forever? Since the dawn of civilization, mankind has sought the secret to immortality.
Lice and the prime
wonder
funk.
if science or religion will ever help us achieve eternal life. But at the very least, art can get us pretty damn close.
Nice. Well, I had no idea it was like that. It was pretty fucking intense.